And good afternoon, Dog Nation. Welcome back into Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. You see me a little unshaven today, a little bit of a different type of look for me. But nonetheless, we're glad to have you looking in on us, wherever you might be. Big weekend coming up for college football here, including a stiff road test for the Georgia Bulldogs. And we'll be giving you all of our thoughts on that from a point spread perspective here coming up on Go With The Flow. The entire Dog Nation team, myself, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, Kaylee Manziel, we'll all weigh in here in a few minutes. Our buddy Dari Payrow from R.S. Andrews will then decide if he wants to go with the flow and join us on the consensus for these games, or if he wants to go against that. We'll do that here in a moment, and we'll invite you to play along with us as we do. And, of course, we're keeping track of those scores each and every week, too, and kind of how that's going. It's actually been a little while here since I've had a winning week, but still atop the standings here, although folks are making ground against me here right now. 10 games over 500, 3-3 last week for me. Jeff Sintel, 4-2 last week, puts him at 29-25 on the year. Connor Riley also even last week, winning on the season at 28-26. Kaylee Manziel, 3-3 there as well. She is even on the year at 27-27. Tough week for Mike Griffith, 1-5, puts him 25-29 on the campaign. And Dari Payrow, right about the time when the big move starts to happen here. 4-2 last week, now 24-30 on the year, but plenty of time for any of this to change. And, of course, some very, very interesting picks ahead of what's going to happen on Saturday as well. So before we get into these picks and start letting you know what we think about the games to come, let's remind you all of this made possible by our friends at R.S. Andrews. And obviously, when you think about air conditioning, heating, and your plumbing electric needs, you think about R.S. Andrews for that. You got a holiday time of year coming up. A lot of folks coming over to perhaps stay for Thanksgiving, things like that. Well, listen, you don't want that experience ruined because the plumbing's not working, people not able to take showers, or obviously all those kinds of issues. If you have any fear of a plumbing emergency messing up your holiday season, go ahead and reach out to our friends at R.S. Andrews. Take care of that here right now. And eventually it's going to be cold weather. You've got to imagine at some point in time winter's going to arrive, although fall has certainly been slow to get here. As you start thinking about all of that, getting that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, that would obviously make a lot of sense for you too. Either way, it's all for you when it comes to our friends at R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. All right, Georgia, fresh off a win against Florida that perhaps left something to be desired and certainly raised as many questions as it answered, now finds itself back on the road again, high-profile spot against a relatively highly ranked opponent, an Ole Miss Rebels team red hot after a blowout win against Arkansas. That's our first game to pick. Let's give you more of the details, and then we'll share our thoughts.
The Dogs will head into Oxford 2.5-point favorites over Ole Miss. Georgia failed to cover last week against Florida, now just 2-6 against the spread so far this year. Lane Kiffin's crew will be home underdogs for the first and likely only time this year they wrap up with Mississippi State. But since Kiffin's been at Ole Miss, his team's 4-2 against the spread when getting points at home.
So interesting note there from Cody Chafin's on kind of a rare underdog spot for Ole Miss at home. The fact they've done pretty well in those situations in the past. Mike Griffith, we come to you. Ole Miss getting 2.5 points. What do you want to do with this spread?
Yeah, it's a toss-up game. What's great about the real-life wagering is you get to pick the games you bet. But, Brandon, you stick me with some tough ones every week, and you seem to know what you're doing, and I haven't of late. So what was Connor doing, talking about Costanzing himself, going against his instincts? Ole Miss has been good at home, but I'm going to go with Kirby and the Dogs and give the points. I think if they can neutralize the Ole Miss running game and get some pressure on Jackson Dart, I'm going to trust Carson Beck to outplay Jackson Dart with fewer mistakes. So give me the Dogs and give the points.
So Mike Griffith on the side of Georgia here, minus the 2.5. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
Intriguing matchup, obviously, since this is a DawgNation flagship product. But this is two teams in the SP rankings that are top 10 in all three phases, special teams, offense, defense. I'm going to have to take the Dogs here, and here's why. I think the one thing we know about Georgia this year is a wounded Georgia or a potentially vulnerable Georgia. That's when Kirby and the team, maybe the internal leadership, gets geeked up, raises its level of play. And I think, simply put, Georgia's been in big games like this so much more than the Ole Miss Rebels. Give me the Dogs on the road to give Kirby a win against a road win in one of the few venues he does not have a win against as an SEC head coach.
Perhaps not surprisingly, a lot of love for Georgia here thus far. Connor, what do you think about a 2.5-point spread?
You know, I'll wear the black hat here. And look, we all picked Georgia against Alabama to win that game, and we saw how that turned out. Everybody but me picked Texas, and Georgia went on to win that game. I have a feeling that Kaylee is going to pick Georgia. I have a feeling BA is going to pick Georgia. I have a feeling that Dari is going to pick Georgia. And so I will wear the black hat, and I will take the L here to ensure that Georgia keeps winning. And so I will pick Ole Miss and the points this week.
So Connor taking one for the team, so to speak, and taking the Ole Miss side here, plus the 2.5, which makes it a very, very tricky spot for UGA indeed, if that is the case. Kaylee, Connor gave his thoughts about what he thinks you're thinking. Now you can tell us for sure what it is you are thinking.
I hate when I have to say these words. I really do. But Connor's absolutely right. I'm going to take the Dogs. Jackson Dart is not going to throw for 500-plus yards and 6 touchdowns on this Georgia defense. And I view Lane Kiffin similar to James Franklin. He is the James Franklin of the SEC. He has not been able to be competitive in these big games that he's not necessarily supposed to win. And so until Lane Kiffin can show me otherwise, I'm going to take the Dogs.
Yeah, I'm going to take Georgia here too. Connor got that one right. And while Cody gave you an interesting number on what Ole Miss has been doing when it's been getting points here at home, the truth is since the start of the 2023 season, when facing SEC teams at home, this hasn't been a great team necessarily against the spread. 2-3-1 against the spread versus SEC teams at Vaught Hemingway Stadium since the start of the 2023 season. You know, Jeff mentioned the ESPN Power Index numbers a little earlier. I think perhaps somewhat surprisingly, Georgia's up to number 5 defensively in that ESPN FPI. If you care about that kind of thing, slight edge over the Ole Miss offense in this particular case. And that's been kind of the thing we've been leaning on all week, the fact that I do believe this is going to be a good day for the Georgia defense on Saturday and the kind of game that Georgia wins, almost throwback fashion, if you want to go back to 2021 and part of 2022, throwing back to a big performance for the Georgia defense being the reason why the win takes place. If you're not fully convinced, let me give you one more number that perhaps bolsters that point. I mentioned Ole Miss at home against SEC teams. For their last 5 SEC home games, the under has hit. People think of Lane Kiffin being this high-powered offense. But the truth is Ole Miss has been sort of a sneaky underplay a lot, especially SEC games here inside Vaught Hemingway Stadium. So I think this game could be somewhat low-scoring. I certainly think it could be a game where both defenses show up in a pretty big way. And if that be the case, I feel like Georgia would have the game plan to win that. So I do like Georgia here. Obviously, nothing is easy for Georgia right now, but this is the kind of win I expect them to earn. So that puts me on the side of Georgia. It puts the flow decidedly on UGA. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Dogs here?
Yeah, I'm going to take Georgia here. I mean, it's a dangerous game, a dangerous line where it's set at right there. But I think, you know, you guys thought last week was kind of the Beck get-right game. I think this is the game. I mean, he has to. And so Ole Miss's defense isn't that good. So I think this is a better matchup game where he can get in a really good rhythm and try to get some confidence going and put up some points on this Ole Miss defense.
All right, so interesting thoughts there on the big game to kind of get us all started here, Georgia and Ole Miss. But not the only really big game in the SEC on Saturday. The nightcap after Georgia and Ole Miss concludes is a rivalry game that's come to mean a lot in the SEC in recent years. That is Alabama going to Death Valley and LSU, with the number also sitting with the home team getting 2.5 points. Cody Chaffins will tell us more about what's expected to happen in Baton Rouge.
Well, both Alabama and LSU are 6-2 and coming off a bye this week. The Tide 2.5-point favorites. They've owned this rivalry lately, winning 11 of their last 13 matchups. LSU did win, however, the last time Bama had to go to Death Valley. That was in 2022. Tigers 3-1 straight up as a home dog under Brian Kelly. That includes an upset over Ole Miss last month.
Good stuff from Cody Chaffins. Fun game, obviously, that has meant a lot in the SEC in recent seasons. Mike Griffith, I come back to you. Alabama given 2.5 at night in Death Valley.
Yeah, I keep waiting to see that Alabama that we saw in the first half against Georgia, and we really haven't. Score against Missouri, somewhat deceptive. That was a close game, halfway through the second quarter till Brady Cook went out. Really don't want to take LSU over Alabama, but I just feel like LSU is a better team right now. So I'm going to take LSU.
So Mike, on the side of the underdog there at home, obviously Brian Kelly hasn't lost in those night games at Death Valley during his LSU career. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
Brandon, maybe we need to get a shirt for Connor that says "Split between the scribes?" ? I know Death Valley is where dreams go to die, but I like Alabama in this one. I like the defense for the Crimson Tide to get it done, and Alabama wants to see itself back in the national rankings and in the playoff picture. I think Alabama gets it done this weekend. Give me the Tide.
So Jeff Sintel on the side of Alabama, and obviously the great reference to the former quote by Les Miles about Death Valley being the place that dreams go to die. That is fun. Connor, you got called out there by Jeff. How do you want to break the tie here with Mike and Jeff on opposite sides here to kick things off?
Yeah, BA likes to jump in, steal my thunder a little bit. Brian Kelly has not lost at home at night as the head coach at LSU. I don't think that's going to start this time around. So give me LSU this week as a home underdog.
Confident pick from Connor. Kaylee, do you feel like you have an angle on this one? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this matchup over the last 3 years, the home team has always won. I think that LSU's been a little bit more consistent than Alabama this season. So ultimately, I think what this game comes down to is which quarterback you trust more. And in Death Valley, I'm going to trust Garrett Nussmeier more. So I'm going to take LSU.
I think it's an interesting angle from Kaylee, and I find myself kind of on the opposite side here. The truth is, when I dive into the numbers, I feel like Jalen Milroe had the better year here. 20 touchdown passes thrown for Garrett Nussmeier, but it's a combined 25 scores for Milroe, 12 of those coming on the ground, 13 through the air. Also, believe it or not, Milroe's been actually better from a yards per attempt standpoint than Milroe has been this year too. So I do think that Milroe's probably having the better year overall. Tough spot on the road, I don't deny that, but just apples to apples here. He's had the better year here thus far. And, we're in year, 3 now for Brian Kelly is the LSU coach, and really you can look at his tenure in Baton Rouge and say, how many big wins does he have? I would say arguably the only true big win he probably has is beating Alabama in 2022. A couple of wins against Ole Miss, but there's not a whole lot of real prestige to be gained from that, not like beating Bama was a couple of years ago, a win that earned an SEC West for Kelly in his first year there. By comparison, Kalen DeBoer, I'm not even sure he's all that great of a coach necessarily, but he does have some big wins. A year ago, he won a couple of times against Oregon. That gave him what was then a Power 5 conference title for a league that's now defunct. He also won a game in the playoffs. So I feel like here I got a little bit of value in that, I'm only having to give 2.5 with a coach who's been to the playoff and won a game there, something that, by the way, Kelly has not done, and a quarterback who's probably having the slightly better season, although I think I like Nussmeier better. Stats don't back it up for right now. I'm going to lean on quarterback, lean on coach. Both have college football playoff experience on the road here in the spot and take Bama minus the 2.5. The flow, though, is on the side of LSU. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Fighting Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, they've won their last 14 games at home there. I like LSU to win this game. I like it on the money line. I like getting points at home. That's a bonus. LSU is going to win this with ease against Bama.
All right, so a lot of confidence there from Dari Payrow, perhaps more than I would have expected, but certainly a compelling game. Also, speaking of the SEC, not quite as much prestige here, but certainly plenty of mystery and intrigue with the final outcome for two teams that are both in their own way playing above expectations here right now. As Vanderbilt, fresh off another win, this time at the hands of the Auburn Tigers, comes back to Nashville to host South Carolina, riding incredibly high after beating Texas A&M last week in pretty convincing fashion. Cody Chavins will tell us more, and then we'll give you our official picks.
South Carolina heads into Vanderbilt as 3.5-point favorites this weekend. The Gamecocks have not lost to the Commodores since 2008. Pretty impressive streak right there. They're also looking for their third road SEC win for the first time in a season since 2011. But as we all know, this is not the same Vanderbilt. This year's Vandy team 3-0 against the spread as home underdogs.
So I think this is a really fun game. I do. And, Mike, I'm curious to get your opinion on it. Vanderbilt getting 3.5 here at home. Underdogs again. Last week I called foul on that. Is it wrong again, though, for the Commodores?
Man, I'll tell you what, South Carolina was so impressive against Texas A&M. You've got to think that momentum and that confidence is going to add up. Has South Carolina's offense slowed down a little bit, or do we believe Auburn's defense is that good? I think it's the former, and so I am going to take South Carolina in this game.
So Mike is on the side of the Gamecocks, giving 3.5 in Nashville. Jeff Sintel, how about for you?
Yeah, I think momentum is really cool here in this game. I like what Sellers is doing at South Carolina with this kind of maybe cubic zirconia Cam Newton act at quarterback. This is a tough game to pick. I think it's probably the toughest one on the docket. But I like the Gamecocks to go in and ruin the Doors' Cinderella season just a little bit. And then now the glass slipper starts to fit on the shoes of the South Carolina Gamecocks.
So Jeff Sintel, in a very dramatic way, describing a South Carolina win there. Connor, what about for you?
Yeah, I'm not going to compare Lenora Sellers to Cam Newton like my colleague just did there, but I think Mike made a great point and about this Vanderbilt offense slowing down a little bit. You know, they say day turns to night, night divides the day. I think South Carolina is going to break on through and get in cover in this game.
Well, Jim Morrison reference there from Connor Riley. Kaylee Manziel, any pick from you here, musical reference included or not?
I can't switch it up. I'm going to have to go with South Carolina. Vanderbilt, what they've done is undeniable, but I do think one of the weaker parts of their team is their offensive line, and South Carolina might arguably have the best defensive line in the entire country. So when you look at the head-to-head matchup, I'm going to have to take South Carolina.
Yeah, a lot of love for South Carolina, perhaps a little bit more than I expected, but I'm going to join in this too. As Kaylee mentioned, great defensive line for the Gamecocks. South Carolina, to reference ESPN's FPI again, they're now up to the number 4 defense nationally right now, according to the ESPN FPI. They are very, very good on that side of the ball, much better than a lot of the teams in the SEC here right now. Beyond that, too, the other reason why I really like South Carolina, look what they've done in the 3 conference road games thus far this year. Essentially blew out Oklahoma, blew out Kentucky, and played a nail-biter, losing very late to Alabama. Those are 3 real legitimate performances on the road here for the Gamecocks. Vanderbilt by now has done enough to prove that in some form or fashion they are for real, whatever that means. But South Carolina has not flinched on the road thus far this season. So giving 3.5 there in Nashville, no problem for me in this particular spot. I believe the Gamecocks the right side here. And somewhat maybe surprisingly, that's a clean sweep. Everybody on the side of South Carolina here. Dari, you want to go with the flow and also take the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I like the Gamecocks here. I think they're going to be able to get a lot of pressure in the backfield on the quarterback. I like their defense to carry them to get this done. So book it, Gamecocks.
Just be really careful. And I just made my case for South Carolina too. Big home game, a lot of emotion. Now you go to Nashville on the road the following week. This is not always a recipe for success. So just be really, really careful, all of us. Clean sweep on South Carolina, perhaps that represents famous last words. All right, so that's the story in the SEC. We're going to step outside of SEC play right now for the first time all year long. Get ready to pick the Indiana Hoosiers, who found themselves ranked inside the top 10 of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's first top 25, which was released there on Tuesday night. But also perhaps a little bit of a step up in competition for a team that's played a very easy schedule this point in the year against the defending national champions, Michigan. Complete reversal of fortune here, with Michigan seeing itself now on the road as a 2-touchdown underdog to the Hoosiers. Cody Chaffins will give us more information on this as Indiana essentially finally plays for the first time this year a team with a pulse. Here's Cody with more.
As we all thought before the season started, the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines will go on the road to an undefeated Indiana as 13.5-point underdogs. Indiana already at a program record 9 wins this season and ranked in the top 10 for the first time since 2020. Oh, by the way, that's also the last time they beat Michigan. Hoosiers 5-1 against the spread as home favorites this season. Michigan only been a road dog once this year and failed to cover at Washington. Wolverines not underdogs at all last season.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of pleasant memories from 2020, just to be frank. But Michael Penix wearing an Indiana uniform was certainly a sort of a fun moment in that season that was, and had some nice games there for the Hoosiers. So the number here is 13.5. Mike, we come to you first. Hoosiers given a bunch of points here at home to the Wolverines. What do you think?
Yeah, this is not a game that I would have picked, but obviously this is fun for you. Indiana, to your point, who have they played? I mean, they handled Nebraska a lot easier than Ohio State did, the team the committee said was better than Georgia. So if they beat Michigan State rather easily, whereas Michigan struggled a little bit in the rivalry game. I really want to take Michigan, but I just can't do it. I think Indiana will have something to prove one more week before they face reality. So give me the Hoosiers, and regretfully, I'm going to take Indiana and give 13.5.
In fairness on the game selections, this is not a ranked versus ranked matchup. Michigan is, though, a pretty powerful brand. We have not had Indiana on the show this week. But really more importantly than that, this is also one of the weakest slates of games for the entire year. There are not a lot of spreads out there inside of 20 points here this week. So you got to find some games somewhere. This is about the best we have. Mike on the side of Indiana. Jeff Sintel, what say you?
Hey, Brennan, it's okay, man. You don't have to feel any sort of doubt about your picks and your slate. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're making that par 4 and par 5 pretty hard with a lot of hazards around it. I think Indiana wins, but I think that's too many points. I can't trust all these points. I think it's a special season in Indiana, but I think that run defense, that front from Michigan is still that. I think you did say earlier, Brandon, that Michigan has a pulse. Well, maybe so, but that defibrillator has been broken out a couple of times to keep them upright this year. So I'm going to take those points, and I'm going to side with Michigan on this one.
Split decision once again. Connor, what about for you?
Yeah, I like Indiana here. I think that this is a team that is playing good football. Conversely, this is a Michigan team that is not at the moment. And while, yes, Michigan does have more talent on paper, I don't know if their star cornerback, Will Johnson's going to play in this game, and I like what Indiana has been able to do. We're 9 games into the season now. If a team shows you who they are, believe them, and I believe in this Indiana team. So give me Indiana at 13.5, an important line that has already moved, depending on where you look.
This doesn't have anything to do with the pick itself, but I sort of get the impression that Will Johnson may be thinking about April right now. I sort of get the impression that he's got his mind on the NFL draft. If I want to give you an idea of where things perhaps stand with the Maize and Blue at the moment. Kaylee Manziel, it's a lot of love for IU here right now. What do you think?
Nah, I think this is arguably the best team that Indiana has faced all year. I think Michigan's defense is good enough to keep it relatively close. 13.5 is a lot. So if I think Michigan can have solid clock management and show some of that defense, I think that it'll be enough. So I'm going to take Michigan.
So I think Kaylee's right. This probably is the best team Indiana's played all year long. Michigan 46th ESPN Football Power Index for a Hoosiers team that strength of schedule-wise comes in 103 in the country. And so from that standpoint, maybe you sort of feel like Indiana's just sort of due for a little bit of regression here. But one of the things that's been pretty successful for me here this season is kind of betting against the Michigan coaching staff. I've said plenty of times before that I don't think that Sharon Moore is equal to the task of being the coach at Michigan. He seems overmatched here right now. But, full disclosure, I also think it may be true as well for the guy on the other side of the ball there, Moore being an offensive-minded dude. What is it, Wink Martindale, I believe, who's the Michigan defensive coordinator? And you can't help but notice this is a complete regression for a Michigan defense here right now that still has some of the same pieces that it used a year ago. This is not, and I know Connor mentioned the Will Johnson injury, but there are a lot of healthy guys on the field here, and for whatever reason, it is not adding up to what it's supposed to for Michigan defensively here right now. This coaching staff, I think, is a real disaster. On the other side, Kirk Cignetti seems to be one of the rising stars here right now. So, a couple of times this year, kind of against our better judgment, we've just sort of defaulted to this Michigan coaching staff can't coach them to a win, can't, in this case, coach them to a cover. And so we're going to do that again. A lot of points for a little bit of a step up in weight class for Indiana, but a total rebuke from us, at least for me, on this Michigan coaching staff. So I'll take Indiana minus the 13.5 here, pretty big number. That puts the flow like heavy on the Hoosiers right now. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take Indiana?
Oh, yeah. I'm actually going to the game, so I'll actually be at that game. I got some friends that went to IU. It's a Hoosier mania fever right now. They don't know what to do with their football team being ranked this high. Indiana is going to absolutely take this opportunity of a down Michigan team to pound them. They're going to easily cover this number. They're going to win by 20-plus points.
Oh, wow. Dari Payrow, quite confident here. Also up to Bloomington here this weekend. It's the kind of game that sort of feels like it should be taking place in Assembly Hall, and, you got the Fab Five against Bobby Knight or something like that. But instead, it is a football game for the Hoosiers hosting Michigan on Saturday. I will remind you of this. This is Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews here on the DawgNation video channels each and every Friday. And in addition to the games we pick here, also, if you'll check out the R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the conclusion of the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily, which has already aired by the time you see the show, we'll also give you an additional pick for no extra charge. Miami hosting top 4 ranked, Georgia Tech hosting top 4 ranked Miami. We'll give you some thoughts on that game, plus our best bets from the weekend. Those have been red hot as of late. Check out the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily and the R.S. Andrews Cool Down for more on that. And speaking of R.S. Andrews, find them online, rsandrews.com. for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. It's still pretty warm outside. That means if you're worried that your AC unit's not going to keep you and your family cool and comfortable, get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Now, before we kind of say goodbye to you here for this evening, one more big game for us to pick here heading into the weekend. For the first time this year, we had a chance to talk about Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes. Sort of weirdly, last year, Colorado, an overhyped team that perhaps got too much attention, never quite living up to that billing. This year, the exact opposite is true. It seems like there's not nearly as much chatter about the Buffs right now, and yet they are 6-2 and alive for a possible spot in the college football playoff. However they go on the road to Lubbock this week, where like the tortillas are going to be thrown at them. I think that's what they do there. Texas Tech also coming off a big win this past weekend as well. Cody Chaffins tells us more.
6-2 and 20th ranked Colorado goes into Texas Tech this week as 3.5-point favorites. Texas Tech as underdogs is a familiar spot for the Red Raiders and one they've thrived in. They're a perfect 3-0 against the spread as underdogs this season. But Prime's boys, they've covered their last 6 games, including 2 upset wins, both on the road.
Yeah, pretty good year for Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes here thus far. And Travis Hunter still very much alive for the Heisman Trophy. So Colorado is a 3.5-point favorite, goes into Lubbock against a Texas Tech team that just knocked off Iowa State. Mike Griffith, we come to you for Colorado at Texas Tech.
Yeah, good job. It's another tough game to pick. For me, looking at these teams' records and what they've done, it looks like whoever plays best. Texas Tech, like you said, coming off a big emotional win over Iowa State. So give me Colorado. I think it'll be hard for Texas Tech to match that performance 2 weeks in a row.
Mike on the side of the Buffs as the relatively small favorite. Jeff Sintel, what about you?
Yeah. Texas Tech's got a pretty good team. Taj Brooks over 1,000 yards. Can throw it a little bit too. I believe their starting quarterback has about 20 touchdown passes, 19-5 ratio there. And that's why, in spite of all that, I like the Buffs. I like Travis Hunter. I like Shedeur Sanders. Remember all those early season stuff about mock drafts and whether Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders was one of the kind of darling senior quarterbacks in the NCAA? Looks like it's Shedeur averaging, lots of yards, 73% passing, 21 touchdown passes. Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, clearly the best 2 players in this game. That's why I'm rocking with the Buffs in this one.
I'm going to break the fourth wall here just for a minute. Can I see Jeff Sintel back on the screen? Do we have all right, so we have that. Can I see Kaylee Mansell on the screen just for a second? Can we switch from Jeff to Kaylee here? When we do the show, we have our folks kind of checking in from Zoom, but also Kaylee and Jeff. We record this on a Wednesday. They're getting ready to also record our great recruiting show, which is known as Before the Hedge, presented by Kroger. It appears that both Kaylee and Jeff are in our DawgNation World Headquarters cafeteria right now. Is that correct? Kaylee, are you and Jeff like sitting in the same booth side by side? Like how close are to you where Jeff? Can you hear Jeff speaking from where you're sitting here right now?
No, I can't. We're probably like 2 or 3 booths away.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice we had the same kind of setup going there. So if you want a little idea, both Jeff and Kaylee have set up stations inside of our World Headquarters studio cafeteria, and that's where they are broadcasting from right now. But the point is, back to the picks. Connor Riley, what do you think here? Colorado going to Lubbock. Like I said before, they throw those tortillas there. Colorado's going to be ducking those.
Guns up. Give me the Raiders. Home money dog, underline. I love it all. Give me Texas Tech.
A little love there for the Red Raiders. Kaylee Mansell will come back to you for your pick here as Texas Tech is getting 3.5 at home.
I'm going to double down with Connor Riley. I'm going to take Texas Tech. They've been quietly good all year. So I don't feel great about either of these picks, but I'm going to double down with Connor. I'm going to take Texas Tech.
The thing that makes me nervous is how much sort of agreement there has been today, because I also like Texas Tech too. My reasoning on this is simple, and I've said this a lot this year. You're not going to get all of these right. I'm not in this situation, but I'm sort of always going against the favorites in the Big 12. This is a league that I think is kind of very, much a parity. There's, a lot of, I think, sameness. There's not a lot of grade. There perhaps is a decent amount of good. On balance, I believe the Big 12 is probably a better league than the ACC is, but the ACC clearly has better teams at the top. So understanding that, I think everybody kind of regressing to the mean is just the sort of simplest play involving the ACC right now. So I don't love sort of putting hopes on Texas Tech for a second straight week after a fairly sizable upset last week. But at a certain point, you also think for Colorado, this is probably not a top 25 team. Their record and ranking would suggest that right now. So maybe it's their turn to kind of come back to the pack here a little bit. So I'll take the flyer on Texas Tech plus the 3.5. That is a lot of love here, though, on the Red Raiders. Dari, is it too much in your mind? You want to go with the flow and take the boys from Lubbock?
Man, this is probably the toughest game for me to pick this week. It's kind of a toss-up. I can see it going either way. I was leaning Red Raiders here with the points at home, but I'm going to go with Dion. I'm going to go with Dion Shador. I think they're going to be able to light it up, and hopefully they can cover that 3.5 and get the cover.
Yeah, for people who maybe were sort of tired of the Dion story a year ago, this is just a different kind of team. Much better defensively this year. That's probably been the main improvement for Colorado. They're just playing a lot better defense. But also, Shador's still having a good year, and Travis Hunter really is one of the best players in the entire country. So that should be a very compelling matchup. Now, as I told you before, if you'll check out the R.S. Andrews cool down at the conclusion of the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily, we'll give you our thoughts about Miami traveling to Georgia Tech. Obviously, Miami, a top 4 ranked team by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee on Tuesday night. And we'll give you our best bets for the upcoming weekend, too. So make sure you check that out, but also make sure you enjoy this week's slate of games. Best of luck to all of you with your own picks. And we'll see you back here again next week at this same time for Go With The Flow